You have a memory of yourself as a child. A specific one. Maybe a birthday party with a cake you can still see clearly. Maybe a holiday at a place that felt enormous at the time. Maybe just an ordinary afternoon that somehow stayed with you when thousands of other days disappeared entirely. You can see it. You can almost feel it. The light, the smell, the faces of the people who were there. It seems more real than most things you experienced last week. That memory is probably not real. Not in the way you think it is. Not in the way your brain is telling you it is right now. And by the time this video ends, you will never think about your own past the same way again. Start with something your brain has never told you. Every single time you remember something, you are not playing back a recording. You are not accessing a file that has been sitting untouched since the moment it was created. You are rebuilding the memory from scratch, using whatever fragments survived, filling the gaps with details your brain considers plausible, and then storing the rebuilt version as if it were the original. The next time you remember that moment, you are not remembering the event. You are remembering the last time you remembered it. And each time you do this, something changes. Something small, something you cannot detect, but something real. Elizabeth Loftus is a cognitive psychologist at the University of California, Irvine, who has spent 50 years studying human memory. She has testified in hundreds of criminal trials. She has advised governments and legal systems around the world. And the conclusion she has reached after 5 decades of research is one that most people find deeply uncomfortable. Memory, she argues, is not a filing cabinet. It is not a hard drive. It is not a recording of any kind. Memory is a living reconstruction, constantly updated, constantly reshaped, and vulnerable to everything that happens after the original event. In one of her most famous experiments, Loftus showed participants footage of a car accident and then asked them questions. One group was asked how fast the cars were going when they hit each other. Another group was asked how fast the cars were going when they smashed into each other. That single word, smashed instead of hit, caused participants to remember the accident as significantly more violent than it was. They reported seeing broken glass that was not in the footage. They described debris that did not exist. One word had quietly rewritten what they believed they had seen with their own eyes. One word? That is all it takes. Now think about your childhood. Think about how many times someone told you a story about something you did when you were very young. A relative describing your first day at school. A parent explaining what you were like before you could form your own memories. A sibling telling you about something that happened between the two of you before you were old enough to remember it independently. Each of those tellings was not reinforcing your memory. Each of those tellings was replacing it. What you carry as your childhood is largely a composite, a patchwork of other people's stories about you, photographs you have looked at enough times to mistake for experience, and your brain's best guess at what the rest must have looked like. Loftus proved this in an experiment that felt almost cruel. She worked with the families of adult participants to construct a completely false memory, a story about getting lost in a shopping mall as a child, being found and comforted by an elderly stranger, and eventually being reunited with the family in a state of distress. None of it happened. There was no mall. There was no stranger. There was no reunion. But after being told the story a few times in a confident, warm, and detailed way by a trusted family member, approximately 25% of participants did not just accept the story. They began to remember it. They added details that had not been in the original account. They described what the stranger looked like, what they were wearing, the expression on their face. They remembered the feeling of panic and then the feeling of relief. They were convinced they were recalling something that had formed them. Your brain does not fact-check its own content. There is something even more unsettling than the creation of false memories. It is the corruption of the true ones. Neuroscientist Karim Nader at McGill University discovered something in the early 2000s that changed the neuroscience of memory permanently. When a memory is retrieved, when you actively bring it to mind, the physical structure that holds that memory in place temporarily dissolves. The proteins that encode it at the molecular level break apart during the act of recall. For a brief window, the memory is open. It is malleable, it is vulnerable, and then it reforms. If anything enters that window, a suggestion from another person, a different emotional state, new information, even the context you are in when you remember, The memory reforms differently. It incorporates the new material. It adjusts, and then it locks back into place, presenting itself as the original. This process is called reconsolidation, and it means that every time you have revisited a memory, you have edited it, without knowing, without choosing to, without any sensation that anything changed. Your most visited memories are your most corrupted ones. Think about what that means for the moments you have thought about the most, the ones you have turned over in your mind on sleepless nights, the ones you have described to other people, the ones that feel most foundational to who you are. Those are exactly the memories that have been rebuilt the most times. Those are the ones that have drifted furthest from the original event. The feeling of certainty you have about them is not evidence that they are accurate. It is evidence that the reconstruction was convincing. The brain does not have a mechanism for tagging a memory as edited. It presents every version with the same confidence, the same sensory texture, the same feeling of "this is what happened." Now add something that almost no one thinks about: photographs. Researchers at Fairfield University found that the act of photographing an experience actively reduces your ability to remember it. When you point a phone at something, your brain partially delegates the task of recording to the device. It reduces its own encoding effort. The photograph becomes the memory. And then something strange happens. You look at the photograph. You look at it again. You look at it on anniversaries and in shared albums and in the notifications your phone sends you every year. And each time you look at it, your brain treats the image as a memory and begins to process it as an experience you lived rather than an image you viewed. The photograph is not your past. It is a flat, two-dimensional object. But your brain converts it into something that feels like memory, stores it alongside your actual recollections, and eventually makes it nearly impossible to separate what you actually experienced from what you have seen in a picture. Your photo album is not a record of your childhood. It is a replacement for it. And then there is social media. The average person who grew up in the digital era has thousands of images of their adolescence archived and accessible at any moment. Every birthday, every trip, every significant and insignificant moment photographed, filtered, captioned, and viewed repeatedly. Researcher Linda Henkel at Fairfield University describes this as cognitive offloading, the systematic outsourcing of memory to external devices. The result is a generation whose memories of their own lives are more thoroughly shaped by images than by experience. You do not remember your life. You remember the documentation of your life. And those are not the same thing. Julia Shaw is a memory researcher at University College London whose work takes the implications of all this into genuinely disturbing territory. Shaw has demonstrated that false memories of committing crimes, serious crimes, can be implanted in healthy, intelligent, psychologically stable adults in just a few sessions of guided conversation. Participants became convinced they had committed theft. They became convinced they had been involved in physical altercations. They provided detailed accounts, expressed remorse, and described their emotional state at the time of events that never happened. The memories felt real because the brain had made them real. The construction was indistinguishable from genuine recollection. If a few hours of carefully structured conversation can make a person believe they committed a crime, consider what 18 years of family storytelling, repeated photographs, shared narratives, and selective reinforcement has done to your memory of your own childhood. Consider the version of yourself you carry, the story of who you were before you were old enough to narrate your own experience. That story was assembled by other people. It was told to you repeatedly. It was illustrated with photographs. It was confirmed by relatives who agreed on certain details and disagreed on others. And your brain, doing exactly what it is designed to do, took all of that input and built something that feels like memory. But it is not memory. It is biography. And biography is always written by someone with a perspective. Here is the final thing worth sitting with. The memories that have never been revisited, the moments that have sat untouched at the back of your mind since they were formed, those are probably the most accurate things you carry. The ones you have never told anyone. The ones you have never looked for in photographs. The ones that have simply existed without being examined. Those have never been opened for editing. Those have never been through reconsolidation. Those are as close to the original as anything you have. But they are also the ones that feel least certain. The ones you are not sure actually happened. The ones you would hesitate to describe because they seem too faded, too fragmentary, too unreliable. The memories that feel most reliable are the least accurate. The memories that feel most uncertain are the closest to true. Your brain has inverted the relationship between confidence and accuracy so completely that your strongest instinct about what is real is the least trustworthy guide you have. You have a memory of yourself as a child, a specific one. You can see it. You can feel it. The light is exactly right. The faces are exactly as you remember them. But the child in that memory has been shaped by every telling. The light has been adjusted by every photograph. The faces have been reconstructed by every conversation you have had about that day. It is close. Your brain made sure of that. Close enough to feel true, close enough to cry about, close enough to have built an entire sense of self upon, just not close enough to be real.